So I'd like to tell you a story about our grandmother. Her name was Sarah, and she lived in some big city in what was at one time either Russia or whatever other invasion happened at that time. She wasn't able to tell me what the name of that city was, or I don't remember. She was a wonderful grandmother. She enjoyed telling stories of her past, such as the fact that she was an orphan. And she lived with her grandmother in this city, who was a milliner who made hats. And she was very frightened every time the Cossacks would ride through her town and rape the young women and abuse all the Jews in that village or town. And therefore, her grandmother used to hide her under her big skirts. And when an opportunity came that there was an American cousin of her grandmother's sent money to bring her to the United States. And the money was enough for her to go steerage in a boat that landed her, we think, in Galveston, Texas. And from there she had to make her way to Denver, Colorado, and then up to the ranch that her soon-to-be husband lived on with 4 or 5, I'm not sure, children. His wife had been killed in a fire. And it's quite amazing that this woman had to adjust to so many things, like being a mother and a farmer and a wife with no English. So she went to night school to learn English whenever she could. And she picked strawberries and she cooked and managed as well as she could for these 4 children, and then eventually had 2 of her own, my mother and her brother. She told me the story about her brother who was born premature, and he was so small that she put him in a shoebox wrapped in cotton batting. So she had a lot of good common sense and a lot of bravery. She divorced our grandfather and came to California, and she opened a business. She was courageous and she was smart and she knew how to make hats. So she started a business. At that time, hats were very important in society. And she knew how to buy property. And when I met her, she was a very old person of maybe 40 or 50. But she ate, because she died at 61. And I thought she was really old. Anyhow, I had the privilege of spending time with her. She would make us coffee, half cream and half sugar. She also absolutely loved horse races. And in Los Angeles, you could take a red car and go to Hollywood Park or to Santa Anita, which she did. And she made friends with all of the jockeys and the trainers. And she also gambled a bit. And I would say to her, "How'd you do at the racetrack today, Grandma?" And she would say, "Not good, not bad." So she always had money to do that. Anyhow, after she died, we got phone calls from bookies, people that took race money, and everybody loved her, and they all called her Susie. And that's why we have a Susie as one of my children. She left a big mark of how to be courageous and how to live a life. Well,
as I recall the story of Grandma's childhood and life, she was orphaned. I don't remember the age she was orphaned at. She was raised by her grandmother, who was a dressmaker and would go from one estate to the other of wealthy people to do their wardrobes for the year. And my grandmother was a little child, and she would go with her. So she lived in these big, beautiful houses sometimes, played with the children of the family that she was caring for. And she was probably 15 or 16, we've said, when a picture of her was sent to America, maybe when she was slightly younger than that, by two uncles. The grandmother had died, and the uncles wanted to have the grandmother's estate because she had made good money over the years doing these clothing for these families. And they wanted to send her to America to be married to somebody in America. My grandfather's family had come to Colorado, to Denver, in the 1880s, is what I remember being told. How they got there, I don't know. But what kind of travel they had to do off of the boat. So I, in my own mind, I don't remember any grandma telling me this, that she must have come into the port in Texas, can't remember that. Galveston, come up the Mississippi River by boat, and then a train over to Denver. That is what my surmisal is. I don't remember being told that. So she was sent a photo of her as a beautiful woman to Denver. There was a lot of family, cousins, aunts, uncles of my grandfather's, extended family, and they could use the word Lancelot, which I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. Landsman, that came from the same town or village the family came from, in probably Poland or Russia, near the borders of those countries that change very much all the time. Not recently, but in the past. And my grandfather's first wife, whose name I don't remember, but I can get a copy of a genealogy on she and the family from Aunt Rose, who was my mother's half-sister, and her grandchildren did a genealogy of the first wife. There were 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. Rosie was the oldest. There were 3 little boys down from her, and the mother was killed in a kitchen fire, very hot. They were, I believe, in Arizona. Grandfather moved the family, LA, Arizona, near Phoenix, and Denver. They kind of moved, I don't know how often and how many times. And so his wife had been killed in a kitchen fire. It was Arizona, very hot, and they had like a fenced-in area to make a kitchen, outdoor kitchen, because it was too hot to cook in the house. And she used kerosene to build up the fire. She threw on too much, and the fire came, and she caught on fire. And the only one around was Aunt Rose, who was probably someplace between 8 and 10. And she ran, and Aunt Rose ran to the nearest farm, which was quite a way away, and they came back, and they rolled her in blankets, but she only survived a day or 2. So he was left with 4 children. The oldest, I thought the oldest was 12 when Grandma came and married him, but when I see a photograph of the family after he was married to Sarah, and our grandmother Annie was probably less than 2 years old, uh, Rosie looked more like a 12-year-old at that time, so she was probably maybe 8 or 9. And Grandpa saw a photograph of Grandma, very beautiful, young 16, about 16-year-old woman, she looks like to us. That was my recall, that she was 16. And he needed a new wife to help him take care of 4 little kids. So he sent the money to the uncles to have her come to America. I never heard from her about the trip. This is my history of what I thought happened is that, you know, she was on a boat, 16, no English, no other language probably but Russian or Yiddish or Yiddish. She maybe had a thing around her neck with her name and her destination on it, on a boat with lots of other people in a hold in the bottom. And so I guess when she got off the boat, they read the message, or somehow she had papers that she showed them where she was going. And that's how a 16-year-old came to America all by herself. And she arrived in Denver to be greeted. Again, my picture of it. We have nothing, I have no way to prove it. Here's grandfather standing on the side of where the train comes in with 4 little kids, boom, 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 boom. And there was nothing she could do but marry him. She had no English, she had no skills, she had probably very little money, and she was in the middle of the wild, wild west in Denver. And so she married, and there was, you know, family there, but she then had the care of the 4 children, and then she had our mother, and 18 months later had Uncle Ben, who was Steve Zoll's father, and then she figured out how not to have any more children, and she raised the kids.
Cold abstinence.
And she was a very smart lady. She went to school at night. She learned how to be a milliner, hat maker, and she had a very good business mind. And the story we later heard, I don't remember whether I was told by somebody else. I think it was not by her, maybe by our mother or someone else, that Phoenix, if they were in Phoenix, was growing like crazy, and there were little old houses that were for sale, probably more likely in Denver than Phoenix. And she asked her husband, our grandfather, if he would give her the money to buy one of these old houses. And he did. And the deal was that they would split the profit. Well, she bought the house for $2,000. She fixed it up and resold it for $4,000. And of course, all the money processes went through Grandpa. And in those days, women didn't have checkbooks. Maybe no one had checkbooks, I don't know. But he held on to the money and would give her money. And so let's split the profits. And he said, no, I'm keeping them. And so then she shortly thereafter divorced him. That's my remembrance of the story. How true it is, I don't know.
Well, that's a
What's that?
wonderful, Pat.
Yeah, well, anyway, I don't know how much longer they lived in Denver. The family, both Grandpa and Grandma, and all the children moved around because Grandpa was a cattle trader, and they lived in Phoenix, they lived in Los Angeles, and they lived in Denver. And I think at the time of the divorce they were in Denver, but when our mother was about 18, she had finished high school, and Ben was 18 months, as I recall, younger than her. She moved the family to Los Angeles, and she had her own millinery shop. I don't remember whether it was in Denver or Los Angeles, but she always made a living. She had gone to school, night school, learned to read and write in English, and maybe took some millinery courses and other things, but she was a very successful businesswoman. She didn't have very good taste in men. She was forced, of course, into the first marriage. She was married, and again, this is just my recall, she was married at least twice, maybe 3 times, or even 4. She was married to Grandpa, forced, and then she married a gambler, as I recall, being told that she divorced him because he was a gambler and spent all her money. And the last husband is the one that I knew, and his name was Harry Rosen, and he was, as I recall again, he couldn't read. I don't know if he could write a little bit. His English was quite broken. She had an accent, but she spoke very, very good English. And this time, she held on to the money. She bought property in eastern Los Angeles, and when we lived near them, next to them, there were about 4 or 5 houses on the property that she bought. We lived in one of them for many years, and she would live in the house kind of on the road, one house between us, and we would go over, and I remember her making things like pickles and sauerkraut, and there were all these big barrels, and that was always fun for us. Then she moved to a smaller house at the back of the property, and my recall there was going there when I got upset with our mother, or she got upset with me, which was quite often, and I would go to Grandma's house, and she would kind of put her hand on my shoulder and pat me down, and then she would make my treat, which was coffee with probably 4 tablespoons of sugar and cream, and that would make me feel better. And I thought of her as the oldest woman in the world, and she died at 61. I mean, it's like another world away. She had had a very hard life, and at 61, at least to my young age of almost 14 when she died, she looked like the oldest woman in the world, even though she was still beautiful. And I do remember she dyed her hair black, pitch black, for many, many years. She decided to let it grow out, and so she had about, the last I remember, she had about 4 inches of white, and then the back was pitch black. And I don't remember what jokes we made about it, but I know that we did. And not to her, but I mean, it was pretty funny because she had this 2-toned head, pure white and pure black. I think that's all.